Hi, my name is Catalina Perez, and today I am presenting on sex trafficking, the exploitation of vulnerability. The objectives of this presentation are to understand the meaning of human trafficking, to identify the relation between vulnerability and human trafficking, to talk specifically about sex trafficking, to define the scale of the problem and identify the myths about human trafficking. We are also going to talk about what the United States and other organizations are doing to combat human trafficking and also what should be done. What is human trafficking? Although human trafficking happens every day in all corners of the world, many are still surprised when they hear about it. Some people believe that slavery has been abolished, but this is far from the truth. According to the international law and Article 3 of the Palermo Protocol, human trafficking is defined a series of actions accomplished through illegal means for illicit purposes. According to the United States Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000, a victim is a person induced to perform labor or a commercial sex act through force, fraud, or coercion. Any person under age of 18 who performs a commercial sex act is considered a victim of human trafficking, regardless of whether force, fraud, or coercion was present. As you can see in the map, human trafficking sees no borders. It affects every country of the world. Any country can be the country of origin, transit, or destination, or even a combination of all. Human trafficking is the exploitation of human beings. It is an action of unequal value, and it involves abuse, oppressive behavior, the gaining of material benefits, and/or fulfillment of aims, purposes, or desire. Exploitation is the abuse of power or the abuse of a position of vulnerability. The consequences of human trafficking are equally devastating anywhere in the world. Meet Jane. She recently broke up with her boyfriend, lost her job, has millions of student loans still to pay. Her dad has never been around. Her mom is suffering from a terminal illness. A guy she met at the bar not long ago told her about a job overseas. This sounded like the perfect opportunity. She will change her environment and not constantly be reminded about her ex-boyfriend. She will be able to gain more money. And if this wasn't good enough, the guy told her that if she does a great job, she'll be promoted and the company will pay for her student loans. How perfect is that? Well, not so perfect. Her story changed the minute she got out of the plane. Her documents were taken away. She was no longer Jane. She was just number 5869.
Tell me your blue skies fade to gray, and tell me your passions gone away.
As Professor Clark explained in her presentation, vulnerability is central to exploitation. Vulnerability exposes people to exploitation. Jane was taking advantage of her situation. The trafficker saw an opportunity in her weakness. When someone is vulnerable, they feel defenseless against predators or attackers. Most of the victims are in those situations not by choice, but by the lack of choices. Traffickers often target people in countries in conflict or crisis where the institutions are weak. They look for those who are vulnerable, such as immigrants, internally displaced people, refugees, ethnic minorities, women, children, domestically abused children, women with low self-esteem, etc. Poverty is one of the major causes for vulnerability that exposes people to exploitation.
Katarina Rosenblatt says she was only 13 when her mother, escaping an abusive relation, took her to live in a hotel in Miami Beach. She remembers her mother worked long hours and she wandered alone.
Soon enough, there was a trafficking ring that spotted my vulnerability, being alone, having low self-esteem coming from a dysfunctional home life. You know, they spotted that. And so there was an older girl that recruited me, and she came up to me as a big sister. And so she was 19 and thin and pretty and everything I thought I wanted to be.
Kat says the girl's name was Mary and she had a plan.
She introduced me to her pimp, and I didn't know he was a pimp, I didn't know he was a scam artist at the time. I thought he was just a nice man, like a father.
Soon after, she remembers finding herself inside a hotel room, dressed as a bride, convinced she was playing a game. She remembers the locked door and drugs on the table.
This guy who was half-dressed with a beer belly hanging out, ready to partake in his transaction. He had negotiated the price with Mary. I should say 20 years ago, the price was $550 for a virgin girl.
Kat says that time she managed to talk and plead her way out of this situation. But soon after, she says she was tricked again, this time by a friend's father.
It came in a place that you would never suspect it, and that was in my middle school. I was in 7th grade, and they blindfolded us and took us to a brothel in Broward County from Miami to Broward. They had paid her father $40 for each of us.
She doesn't remember how long she was there for and how many men came by.
And they let me know what would become of me if I ever told anyone. They told me that they knew where I lived, they knew who my teachers were, they knew what school, they knew everything about me. There was nothing I could do to protect myself, and at 14 years old, I didn't even know where to begin.
She dropped out of school and became addicted to drugs. Prostitution didn't seem so foreign anymore. She met up with a pimp. Her dreams were crushed.
I'm nothing but a drug addict and I guess a prostitute for these guys. At 15, I had given up on myself. I belonged to the street. I belonged to whoever would show me kindness or give me cocaine.
More than 20 years ago, a drug overdose and a customer with AIDS scared her so much she ran away from that life and never looked back.
And I just remember waking up and walking away and saying, I'm done with this. I'm never going back there. These people could care less about me. They would kill me if they could.
It was not until recently that she dared to tell her story. Her motivation was to help girls in her same situation. Now, Kat works along law enforcement to help them better understand the industry. She also started an organization that provides shelter, support, and counseling to victims of trafficking. The name, There Is Hope for Me. Adriana Hauser, CNN, Miami.
As we saw in the video, Kat was forced into accepting many clients a day. Sex trafficking is referred to the recruitment, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for the purpose of a commercial sex act. Commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion. Also, when the person performing the sexual act is under the age of 18, force, fraud, and coercion are not necessary to be considered sex trafficking. According to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime Global Report on Trafficking in Persons, the sexual exploitation was noted as by far the most commonly identified form of human trafficking by 79%, and followed by forced labor by 18%. An explanation for this might be because it is more frequently reported, since the exploitation of women tend to be more visible in, for example, city centers and along highways. However, it is important to understand that sex trafficking is not the only part of this massive international problem. Human trafficking includes diverse forms of exploitations such as forced marriage, children begging, children serving as child soldiers, labor exploitation. One of the main problems of human trafficking is that human trafficking is not considered a problem. Modern day slavery is considered to be one of the fastest growing transnational organized crimes. Social scientists estimate that as many 27 million men, women, and children are trafficking victims at any given time. The Trafficking in Persons report estimates that based on the information government has provided, only around 40,000 victims have been identified in the last year. In the international drug trade, drugs are a one-time transaction, while people can be sold many times. This makes a lot more profit, and traffickers are attracted to this. There is a high HIV infection among people trafficked for the purpose of sexual exploitation. According to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crimes, it ranges from 40% up to 90%. Last but not least, the conditions in which the victims are left behind are unbearable. A problem is best solved when it's well understood. Human trafficking is surrounded by myths and misconceptions, many generated by the media, which interferes not only with how policy is made, but how people understand it. As I explained earlier, trafficking is slavery. Also, movement is not necessary. Human trafficking occurs across borders or within a single country. Also, human trafficking is not a foreign problem. It happens everywhere, including the United States. Trafficked victims do not go to the police because they're scared that they will get arrested for immigration violation or prostitution. It is important to understand the meaning of human trafficking, to not punish victims who commit crimes as a result of being subject to trafficking. As mentioned earlier, human trafficking refers to more than sex trafficking, and it includes people of all ages and gender. Even if prostitution is legal in a country, prostitutes can be physically and psychologically harmed and forced to perform unwanted sex acts. Another myth is that it's cultural. Misperceptions that these violent acts are shared values among an ethnic group ignores the methods of force and coercion that are used to traffic individuals. But the biggest myth is that there's nothing you can do about it. Everyone can learn the signs of human trafficking and spread the word. People can also learn about organizations that are assisting victims to donate their money or volunteer their time. People can also learn to safely refer potential victims for help. People could also save the National Human Trafficking Hotline number on their phone, and if they see several signs of modern-day slavery, they can call. The United States government anti-trafficking efforts have increased since the ratification of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000. The TVPA seeks to combat trafficking by promoting a policy of the 3 Ps: prosecuting traffickers, protecting victims, and preventing more human trafficking events. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton proposed a 4P partnership to work along with non-governmental organizations, civil society organizations, and interest groups. The TVPA was reauthorized in 2013 to reassure the U.S. government's leadership role in the fight against modern-day slavery and violence against women. It complemented these efforts with the State Department's annual Trafficking in Persons report. This report classifies countries into tier systems depending on government's effort to combat human trafficking. The report also acknowledges the efforts of activists around the world who had been persistently working against human trafficking. The report also recognizes victims who, despite their horrible past, are looking forward for their future by helping prevent others to go through what they had experienced before. Human trafficking is a complex subject with a long-term solution. However, short-term goals could alleviate the conditions and diminish the demand and supply. The United States could continue the improvement to access quality education. We can also work on community awareness, mass media campaigns, work on social and economic initiatives, cooperate with non-governmental organizations. The government should strengthen measures to alleviate factors that make people, especially women and children, vulnerable to trafficking, such as poverty, underdevelopment, and lack of equal opportunity. It will also help to have more female representation in political leadership. This provides a female perspective in policies to prevent and protect victims of human trafficking. I have come to the conclusion of the presentation. Today we define human trafficking, we identified the relation between vulnerability and human trafficking, we defined sex trafficking, and talked about the scale of the problem. We explained the myths about human trafficking, and described what is being done and what should be done to combat human trafficking. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and if you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.
gonna do today? What you gonna do? What you gonna do, boy? What you gonna do today? Told her she would have a better life, so to a man to become his wife. Caught in a debt she was forced to pay. Used her body all hours of the day. Beat her up when she disobeyed. Injected drugs when she ran away. She's all alone again. Oh, she cries for help, but no one knows about her. What you gonna do? What you gonna do, boy? What you gonna do today? What you gonna do? What you gonna do, boy? What you gonna do today? She's black and blue all over her skin. Starving and hungry, she's looking so thin. Forced to abort every month or two. This is a life, not a lie, but the truth. Every second when they touch her, she feels the pain when they feel the pleasure. She's all alone.